The room was electric. Every camera pointed toward the stage as words flew like sharpened blades. The debate had been tense all evening, but no one could have predicted the line that would send shockwaves across the nation. Karoline Leavitt leaned into her microphone, her lips curled in that practiced smirk, and with the cold precision of someone aiming to wound, she spat the words that instantly froze the air. "Why don't you just go back to India?" It wasn't just an insult. It was an arrow dipped in venom, a dismissal not only of the man standing across from her, but of millions who saw themselves reflected in his story. For a fraction of a second, silence swallowed the hall. The audience stopped breathing, stunned that such a line could be uttered in the glare of the national spotlight. Cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of triumph in Karolina's eyes, as if she believed she had landed a devastating blow. But that fleeting smirk would not last. The crowd began to stir. Gasps cut through the stillness. A murmur spread like wildfire, as if everyone present instinctively knew they had just witnessed something that would not stay confined to this room. On social media, the clip was already escaping into the bloodstream of the internet. The words were raw, jagged, and unforgettable. A hashtag was being born in real time, even before the moderators could react. And then the camera found him. Kash Patel. He did not flinch. He did not recoil. He stood there, still as stone, eyes steady, as though he had faced this storm before and knew exactly how to walk through it. His pause was deliberate, his silence louder than Karoline's insult. Every second stretched into eternity, and the audience leaned forward, knowing instinctively that something was coming. Something that would not just answer an insult, but redefine it. In that suspended moment, America itself seemed to hold its breath. Was this going to be another instance of ugliness brushed aside? Another painful echo of words immigrants had heard for generations? Or was it going to be the instant when the narrative changed? What Patel said next would not only silence her, it would ignite an entire country. The stage wasn't just a platform for policy, disagreements. It had become an arena where America's deepest anxieties were being played out in real time. Beneath the bright lights and carefully timed applause lines, the stakes were far greater than who might win a debate, trophy, or dominate a news cycle. This was about belonging. This was about who gets to claim the title of American. Karoline's words struck at the core of that question. Go back to India was more than a cheap jab. It was a challenge to the very foundation of the American promise. It was a reminder of every insult whispered in classrooms, every slur muttered on playgrounds, every moment when someone's citizenship, someone's contribution, someone's right to exist in the only country they called home was put on trial. And in that instant, every immigrant, every child of immigrants, every American who had ever been told they didn't belong felt the sting. The debate moderators shuffled papers nervously, unsure if they should intervene, but the damage had already been done. Across living rooms, bars, and phones lit up with live streams, viewers weren't just seeing another exchange. They were watching the raw clash of two visions of America. On one side, a vision that weaponized ancestry, that treated difference as weakness, that reduced patriotism to a bloodline. On the other, a vision embodied in the stillness of Kash Patel, who carried in his silence the weight of generations, who had fought to prove that American identity was not inherited but earned. The culture war undertones were impossible to ignore. This wasn't a clash about healthcare plans or budget numbers. This was about who speaks for America. Karoline had thrown her gauntlet down with arrogance, betting that outrage would rally her base. But what she didn't anticipate was that Patel had been preparing his entire life for this exact moment, not with rehearsed lines, but with lived experience. Because when Patel finally opened his mouth to respond, it wouldn't just be a counter-argument. It would be testimony. It would be the voice of a son of immigrants who had studied the law, advised presidents, and served his country with loyalty that no insult could diminish. It would be the voice of someone who had faced the sneers and still believed in the idea of America enough to fight for it on the biggest stage. That's what Karoline and perhaps the entire country had underestimated. This wasn't about one man defending himself. This was about Patel stepping into the role of proxy for millions, whose stories had never been given a microphone. Millions who were tired of being told that their skin color or their family's origin made them less American. And that's why the silence that followed her insult was so heavy. It wasn't emptiness, it was expectation. A nation waited to see if Patel would do what so many before him had done: swallow the pain, keep his head down, let the ugliness pass unchallenged. Or if he would rise, look bigotry in the eye, and answer it with something stronger, something that could not be dismissed. The tension was unbearable. The camera zoomed in closer. Social media tickers began to light up as people typed, "Is he going to say something? He has to respond. This is history in the making." And history was exactly what was about to unfold, because what Patel carried with him that night was not just a rebuttal. It was a lifetime's worth of proof. Proof that America's story is not owned by those who shout the loudest, but by those who live it with dignity. Proof that silence, when broken by truth, can become thunder. And the thunder was about to begin. Karoline Leavitt didn't stumble onto the national stage by accident. She marched onto it with the kind of swagger that could only be born of certainty. Certainty that the sharper her words, the bigger her spotlight. From the moment she first appeared in local politics, she built her reputation on being brash, unfiltered, and unapologetically confrontational. To her supporters, she was a truth-teller who refused to bow to political correctness. To her critics, she was a provocateur addicted to controversy. But to everyone watching, one thing was undeniable: she knew how to command attention. Her rise was quick, fueled by sound bites that cut like knives and traveled faster than her opponents could recover. In town halls and campaign rallies, she developed a rhythm, a performance of indignation and superiority, punctuated by smirks and dismissive gestures that told audiences she saw herself not just as another politician, but as a cultural warrior. She thrived in outrage, and outrage was the oxygen that kept her name in headlines. Every step of her journey was marked by calculated confrontation. If an opponent hesitated, she would pounce, drilling into their weakness with a grin that bordered on cruel delight. If a journalist questioned her, she would pivot not to defend herself but to mock them, framing the exchange as yet another victory over the so-called elites. For Karoline, debate wasn't about persuasion, it was about domination. She wanted to leave opponents humiliated, reduced, caricatured in the eyes of her audience. And in that desire, arrogance became her signature. The media amplified her every word. Clips of her sharp retorts went viral, not because they were thoughtful, but because they were incendiary. She learned quickly that the more outrageous her attacks, the greater her reach. She embodied a style of politics that wasn't built on nuance but on spectacle, a style that rewarded confidence even when it was reckless. Her strategy was simple: burn brighter than anyone else, even if it meant burning bridges along the way. Yet beneath the confidence was entitlement. Karoline moved through politics with the assumption that she belonged at the center, that her voice carried more weight than experience or expertise. She wore inexperience as a badge of honor, dismissing seasoned opponents as relics of a system she claimed to reject. But that dismissal often revealed her blind spot in mistaking arrogance for strength. She repeatedly underestimated those around her. And so, her career was littered with small but telling missteps, moments when her sharp tongue cut too deep, alienating potential allies, or when her fiery soundbites crossed the line into pettiness. Each time she escaped real consequences, protected by the speed of the news cycle and the loyalty of her base. But the pattern was clear. Her recklessness always carried the seeds of her downfall. The insult she hurled at Patel was not an anomaly. It was the natural extension of her style, sharpened over years of rewarding confrontation. To Karoline, it was just another zinger, another moment of dominance, another clip to trend online. But what she failed to recognize was that this time, the insult was aimed not just at an opponent, but at an entire community watching from the sidelines. It wasn't clever. It was cruel. And cruelty, once magnified under the national spotlight, has a way of turning on its wielder. Her smug confidence had always been her weapon, but it was also her greatest vulnerability. Every time she smirked after delivering a blow, she underestimated the resilience of the people she targeted. Every time she dismissed an opponent as beneath her, she ignored the possibility that they might rise to meet her arrogance with dignity. And every time she mistook recklessness for strength, she inched closer to a moment when her words would finally catch up with her. That moment had arrived. Karoline Leavitt walked onto that debate stage with the same bravado that had carried her this far. She assumed the spotlight was hers to command, that her sharpest jab would leave Patel reeling. But what she failed to understand was that Patel was not like her past opponents. He wasn't another stepping stone for her rise. He wasn't someone easily rattled or silenced. He was someone who had weathered storms far greater than her insults, someone who carried in his presence a quiet authority that no smirk could diminish. And so when she sneered, "Go back to India," She believed she had landed yet another viral soundbite, a clip to energize her supporters and cement her image as fearless. What she didn't realize was that she had crossed into territory from which there would be no easy escape. This was not just another reckless jab. This was the fatal overreach of a style built on arrogance. Karoline Leavitt had made a career of lighting fires. On this night, she lit one too many, and it was about to consume her. Before the debate stage, before the viral moment, before the insult that would echo across the country, Kash Patel's story began in the quiet. Resilience of immigrant parents who arrived in America, with little more than grit and hope. His parents, Indian immigrants who had left behind comfort for uncertainty, worked long hours in modest jobs to build a foundation for their children. They believed deeply in the promise of this country, that hard work could carve out dignity, that sacrifice could open doors, and that their children would walk paths they themselves could not. Kash absorbed those values early. His childhood was shaped not by ease but by relentless effort. He saw his parents come home exhausted yet proud, teaching him that worth was not measured by where you came from, but by what you contributed. While classmates sometimes mocked his heritage, Kash learned to channel that sting into fuel. Instead of retreating, he pushed forward, studying harder, working longer, carrying not just his own ambitions, but the unspoken dreams of his family. That drive took him into the world of law, where discipline and precision mattered more than background. As an attorney, he sharpened his mind into a tool of exactness, learning to see through noise and get to the heart of truth. It wasn't glamour that pulled him into the legal profession, it was service. Service to a country that had opened its doors to his family. Service to the principles of justice that had been promised in the Constitution, a document his parents revered even before they understood all its words. But Patel didn't stop at the courtroom. His path led him into national security and politics, places where immigrants rarely found easy footing. As a staffer, an advisor, and later a prominent figure in government, he navigated hallways lined with portraits of those who had been born into power and privilege. He knew he didn't look like them. He knew his last name stood out. But he also knew something they did not. He had earned every inch of ground he stood on. And with every new challenge, he carried himself with calm discipline. While others sought headlines, Patel worked behind the scenes, drafting memos, shaping strategies, advising leaders in moments of crisis. He was not the loudest voice, but he was the steady one, the one who brought clarity when chaos reigned, the one who remembered that loyalty to country mattered more than loyalty to ego. That kind of service doesn't come without cost. Patel faced the sneers of colleagues who doubted his place. He endured attacks from critics who questioned his motives. He carried the burden of being an outsider in rooms where tradition still clung to exclusion. And through it all, he bore the weight of representing not just himself, but every immigrant family who dared to believe that their children could stand in those same rooms. Each insult, each roadblock, each setback could have hardened him into cynicism. Instead, they carved him into steel. He chose dignity over bitterness, calm over rage, resilience over surrender. Where others might have lashed out, Patel steadied himself. He had learned from his parents that storms are weathered not by shouting at the wind, but by planting roots deep enough to outlast it. That resilience was his superpower. It made him more than a political advisor. It made him a symbol of the American dream in its truest form, not a story of ease, but a story of persistence, not a birthright, but a triumph earned through sacrifice. And so, when Kash Patel walked onto that debate stage, he carried more than policy points and talking notes. He carried decades of struggle and perseverance, the invisible weight of his parents' sacrifices, and the quiet pride of every immigrant family who had ever whispered to their children, "Work harder. You belong here." That's why, when Karoline Leavitt unleashed her insult, Patel didn't react with shock. He had heard versions of those words before, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in whispers meant to wound. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just an individual absorbing the sting. He was a man standing before the nation, with cameras rolling, millions watching, and the chance to transform an insult into a defining truth. His calm wasn't indifference, it was mastery. It was the stillness of someone who had trained his entire life not to be rattled by arrogance. It was the strength of someone who understood that dignity, held steady under fire, is more powerful than any slur, and that's why his pause mattered. The silence after Karoline's words wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of his entire journey, a journey that began with immigrant parents sacrificing in silence, a journey that wound through long nights of study, uphill battles in Washington, and years of proving that he belonged in rooms that never expected him. Every hardship Patel had faced prepared him for this single night. Every insult endured had sharpened his resolve. Every sacrifice carried had strengthened his spine. And in that moment, as he stood unmoved in the face of cruelty, America didn't just see a man on a stage. It saw the embodiment of its own best promise, that no matter where you come from, dignity and resilience can make you unshakably American. What Patel was about to say would not simply defend himself. It would speak for all those who had ever been told to go back. And when he spoke, he would not just answer Karoline, he would answer history. The night had already been thick with tension. The debate wasn't about polite exchanges or measured policy talk, it was a battleground. And everyone in the room felt it. Each question from the moderators was another match tossed onto dry kindling, and each response from the candidates seemed designed less to illuminate and more to inflame. The air buzzed with anticipation, as though the crowd knew something explosive was bound to happen. Karoline had been circling Patel all evening. She spoke quickly, her words sharp, her tone biting, darting in and out of topics with a smirk that dared him to interrupt. She thrived on interruption. Her strategy was simple: keep him off balance, force him to defend instead of lead, draw him into her rhythm of confrontation. And for a while, the audience could see her delight in the cat and mouse of it all. Patel, however, refused to play by her rules. He answered the moderators with steady calm, his voice even, his posture grounded. While Karoline's hands carved the air in animated gestures, Patel kept his on the podium, never rising to her bait. Each time she jabbed, he responded with substance. Each time she provoked, he redirected to principle, and the contrast was beginning to show. The audience sensed it too. They murmured when Patel held his composure. They chuckled when Karoline's interruptions felt more like petulance than strength. And the more she pressed, the more it became clear that she wasn't rattling him, she was rattling herself. But Karoline wasn't one to retreat. The more she felt the crowd slipping, the harder she pushed. Her voice grew sharper, her attacks more personal. She mocked his resume, belittled his experience, questioned his loyalty. Each barb was meant to dig beneath his calm exterior and draw blood. And then the moment came. Leaning toward the microphone, her voice dripping with disdain, she delivered the line that would echo far beyond the walls of that hall. "Why don't you just go back to India?" The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The insult landed not as a clever jab, but as a grenade, detonating in the center of the stage and sending shockwaves rippling through the room. Gasps erupted from the audience. Some clutched their mouths in disbelief. Others exchanged glances wide-eyed, as if to confirm they had heard what they thought they heard. Even the moderators froze, their scripts forgotten, their professional masks unable to hide the shock on their faces. Silence followed, a heavy, punishing silence that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of people realizing they had just witnessed a line being crossed, a wound being opened in public view. All eyes turned to Patel. Would he break? Would he snap back with anger, confirming the caricature she had tried to paint of him? Would he shrink, as so many before him had been forced to shrink, swallowing the insult and moving on? Or would he rise? The cameras zoomed in close, capturing every flicker of expression. Patel's face was calm, almost unnervingly so. His eyes locked on Karoline, not with fury, but with the steady gaze of someone who had weathered storms far greater than this moment. The crowd leaned forward, waiting, knowing instinctively that something was coming. On Twitter, the clip had already begun to circulate. The words, "Go back to India," flashing across screens, like a scar on the national conscience. Comments poured in. Did she really just say that? This is disgusting. Patel better answer this. The tension in the room became unbearable, pressing on everyone's chest like a weight. Karoline smirked, convinced she had cornered him, convinced her grenade had done its work. But as Patel drew in a breath as he prepared to open his mouth, the energy shifted. The silence became less about her insult and more about his response. The crowd wasn't waiting for her anymore. They were waiting for him. Because in that moment, everyone knew the next words he spoke wouldn't just define the debate. They would define the night. And what Patel was about to say would not only silence her, it would set the nation on fire. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. Karoline's words still lingered in the charged air, echoing inside the heads of every person watching, both in the debate hall and in living rooms across America. The silence that followed was suffocating. an expectant pause where history holds its breath, unsure whether it's about to witness yet another ugly moment brushed aside or the birth of something transformative. Kash Patel did not rush. He stood still, one hand resting gently on the podium, his eyes locked on Karoline with a steadiness that unnerved even her. Where she had spit venom with the glee of a brawler, he radiated composure. His pause was deliberate, powerful, stretching the silence into a canvas on which his words would soon paint something unforgettable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and low enough that the audience leaned in to catch every syllable. "I've heard those words before," he began. "Not just tonight, not just here. I've heard them whispered on playgrounds, shouted in parking lots, even slipped into conversations by people who thought I wouldn't notice." A murmur spread through the audience. Patel's words carried not just truth but recognition. Millions watching at home nodded, remembering their own versions of those same words. He continued, his eyes still unwavering. "But let me tell you what you don't understand, Karoline. I am not from somewhere else. I am from here. This is my home. My parents came to this country with nothing but faith in the American dream, and they built a life through hard work, sacrifice, and loyalty to this nation." He paused again. The silence was no longer heavy, it was alive, charged with anticipation. "My story is America," Patel declared, his voice rising now, cutting through the air like a blade. "And no one, not even you, gets to decide who belongs." The room erupted. Applause thundered from every corner, cheers cascading like waves, drowning out even the moderator's attempts to restore order. Patel stood tall, not basking in the reaction, but anchored in it, letting the moment belong, not just to him but to everyone who had ever carried the weight of being told they didn't belong. The cameras cut to Karoline. The smirk that had curled her lips moments earlier was gone. Her eyes darted, her jaw tightened. She fumbled with her notes, shifting uneasily as if the podium beneath her suddenly felt unstable. The grenade she thought she had thrown had exploded in her own hands. Patel pressed on, his cadence deliberate, his words chosen with surgical precision. "My parents believed in this country even when it didn't always believe in them. They believed that America was worth the struggle, worth the sacrifices, worth the long hours and the uphill climb. And they taught me that serving this country is the highest honor. That's why I became a lawyer. That's why I served in government. That's why I'm here tonight." The audience roared again, clapping, cheering, some even rising to their feet. Every pause Patel left was filled not with silence, but with affirmation from the crowd. "And you want to tell me to go back?" His voice sharpened now, the calm edged with steel. "No, Karoline, I'm not going back. I'm not going anywhere. Because America is mine just as much as it is yours. And the truth is, my America doesn't look at someone's skin color, or their last name, or where their parents were born, and decide whether they're American enough. My America believes in contribution, in service, in dignity." A chant began in the audience, soft at first, then louder, swelling with momentum. "USA! USA! USA!" It wasn't for Karoline. It was for him, for the man who had taken the ugliest insult and turned it into a patriotic creed. On social media, the explosion was instantaneous. Hashtags began to trend within minutes. Patel for America, My Story is America, Dignity over Hate. Clips of his words were clipped, captioned and shared across platforms, gathering millions of views in real time. TikToks looped the phrase "My Story is America" against triumphant music. Twitter feeds lit up with Americans of every background declaring, "That's my story too." Back in the debate hall, Patel was not finished. He leaned slightly forward, his tone softer now but even more piercing. "What you said tonight is the kind of insult that has been hurled at generations of immigrants. But here's the truth. Every insult like that only makes us stronger. Because we've spent our lives proving that no matter what you say, no matter how you try to diminish us, we belong. We are America. We've been here building it, defending it, believing in it, and we are not going anywhere." The camera cut again to Karoline. Her hands gripped the sides of her podium. Her eyes flicked toward the crowd as if searching for an ally, but found only faces locked on Patel. The confidence that had carried her all evening was draining, leaving her small beneath the bright lights. Patel finished with a line that would be replayed for years to come. His voice was steady, but it carried the force of history behind it. "You can tell me to go back. You can tell my parents they don't belong. You can tell every immigrant family that their sacrifices don't matter. But here's what you cannot do. You cannot erase the truth. We are America. And no matter how loud the hate gets, our dignity will always speak louder. The crowd exploded again, this time with a standing ovation that lasted for nearly a full minute. Some in the audience wiped away tears. Others clapped until their palms burned. It wasn't just a debate response. It was a declaration, a moment of reclamation. Karoline stood frozen, diminished, her arrogance stripped away by the sheer gravity of Patel's words. Where she had sought to make him small, she had only made him larger. Where she had tried to push him out, she had given him the stage to step fully into the light. And as the chants of USA, USA reverberated through the hall, it became clear the insult meant to silence Kash Patel had instead given him the microphone of a nation. The debate was no longer about policy or points or sound bites. It was about something bigger. It was about the very definition of America. And in that defining moment, Patel had seized it. Karoline Leavitt shrank in her corner, a villain undone by her own arrogance, while Patel stood tall, a hero whose story now belonged to millions. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling would prove that this wasn't just a debate moment. It was the spark of something far larger, a wave that would sweep across social media, late-night talk shows, and political circles. And the ripple effects of Patel's words were only just beginning. The debate stage lights dimmed, but the echoes of Patel's words did not fade. They leapt from the hall to screens across America, and within hours, they detonated across the digital landscape like a cultural supernova. On Twitter, hashtags were already surging before the debate even ended. Patel for America. My story is America, dignity over hate. Clips of Patel's piercing declaration, my story is America. And no one, not even you, gets to decide who belongs, spread faster than wildfire. TikTok edits layered his words over swelling orchestral scores, intercut with images of immigrants arriving at Ellis Island, soldiers saluting the flag, children raising their hands in classrooms. The clip wasn't just being shared, it was being claimed. One TikTok creator wrote, as the daughter of Mexican immigrants, this hit me in my soul. That's my story too. Her video, filmed with tears in her eyes, racked up 1 million views overnight. A Korean-American veteran stitched the clip with his own words. I fought for this country. I bled for it. And Patel's right, we are America. Another viral post showed a montage of Indian shopkeepers, Nigerian nurses, Puerto Rican firefighters, and Appalachian coal miners with Patel's words playing underneath. Captioned simply, this is us. Within 24 hours, Patel's words weren't just a rebuttal, they were a rallying cry. Late-night talk shows seized on the moment. Stephen Colbert replayed the clip, pausing to emphasize Patel's calm stare as Karoline faltered. This, Colbert said, tapping the desk, is how you end a debate. Not with a zinger, not with an insult, but with truth. Seth Meyers opened his monologue with a quip. Karoline told Patel to go back, and he went back. All right, back to the Constitution. Back to the American dream. Back to everything she forgot this country stands for. Even conservative commentators, usually skeptical of Patel, admitted on air that Leavitt had overplayed her hand. One Fox News analyst sighed, that line backfired, big time. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's campaign scrambled. Her staff released a carefully worded statement claiming she had been misunderstood, insisting she was only questioning Patel's loyalty, not his belonging. But the damage was irreversible. Clips of Patel standing tall while she squirmed played, side by side with her defensive press release, and the contrast was brutal. Donors whispered of pulling support. Moderates distanced themselves. For many, Leavitt's outburst had crossed an unspoken line. Patel, on the other hand, found himself at the center of something larger than a political campaign. Across social media, Americans of every background were repeating his words, that's my story too. A black grandmother in Georgia posted a selfie video. My parents were told to go back to Africa, but they stayed. They worked. They built. Hearing Patel tonight, I felt like he was speaking for me. A white farmer in Kansas tweeted, my great-grandfather was told he didn't belong when he came from Ireland. Patel reminded me of that. This country's built by people who didn't listen to the hate. Even school children echoed the refrain. Teachers reported hearing their students, from immigrant kids to fifth-generation Americans, scribbling Patel's line in notebooks, chanting it in hallways, my story is America. The emotional layering was profound. Patel's rebuttal had transcended the debate stage and become a mirror in which Americans saw themselves. For some, it validated lifelong struggles against exclusion. For others, It reconnected them to family histories they had long taken for granted, and for many, it reignited a sense of patriotism untainted by cynicism. The press dubbed it the mic drop heard around America. Newspapers ran front-page spreads with Patel's face next to bold headlines, "I am America." The Washington Post described his words as a rhetorical lightning bolt, grounding abstract ideals in lived truth. The New York Times called it the rare debate moment that rewrites narratives in real time. Meanwhile, campaign strategists marveled at the numbers. Patel's follower count skyrocketed across every platform. His campaign donation portal crashed twice in a single night under the flood of contributions. Aides whispered that in less than 48 hours, his fundraising haul had eclipsed the last month's totals combined. But beyond the politics, something deeper was shifting. The viral wave wasn't just about Patel. It was about reclaiming the American identity itself. His words were not heard as a candidate soundbite, but as a collective anthem resonating in barbershops, church pews, subway cars, and kitchen tables. One viral tweet captured the sentiment perfectly. Patel didn't just speak for immigrants. He spoke for every American who's ever been told they don't count. And we all needed to hear it. Karoline Leavitt, once smug and untouchable, now appeared isolated. A villain shrinking in the national imagination. Patel, on the other hand, seemed larger than life. Not because he had shouted louder, but because he had spoken with dignity when dignity was needed most. The shockwaves were undeniable. Within a single day, Patel's response had shifted the debate narrative, reshaped the election conversation, and etched itself into the cultural memory. His calm words, delivered in the face of ugliness, had become a shared declaration. And as America replayed the clip again and again, one thing was clear. Patel had not just answered an insult. He had answered a question the nation had been asking itself. Who belongs? The answer now echoed from millions of voices, layered into a single unshakable truth. We are America, and no one, not even you, gets to decide who belongs. When the storm of headlines, hashtags, and hot takes settled, what remained was not the sting of an insult, but the strength of a response. Patel's words had taken on a life of their own, echoing far beyond the debate hall, resonating in living rooms, classrooms, and city squares. And in that resonance, a larger truth emerged, one bigger than politics, bigger than Patel, and even bigger than the clash itself. America, at its core, has never been defined by where someone begins. From the Mayflower to Ellis Island, from Mississippi cotton fields to Silicon Valley startups, the true measure of belonging has always been contribution. What you give, not where you came from. Patel's declaration, "My story is America," wasn't just personal pride. It was a reminder of the nation's original promise, that America is less a place on a map and more a covenant of ideals. And in that moment, the contrast could not have been sharper. On one side stood the politics of division, of drawing lines and slamming doors. On the other stood dignity, calm yet unyielding, insisting that America's greatness lies in its capacity to include rather than exclude. Leavitt had tried to reduce Patel to an outsider with 7 words. Patel responded with a creed that made every American feel like an insider. The moral crescendo was undeniable. Dignity defeats hate. Values outweigh insults. And sometimes, the most powerful act of patriotism is simply refusing to surrender your place in the story of America. In classrooms, teachers began weaving Patel's line into history lessons, comparing it to the words of Frederick Douglass, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Martin Luther King. Shorts are moments where individuals stood against exclusion and declared a bigger vision of what America could be. In boardrooms, CEOs referenced Patel's response as a lesson in leadership, staying calm under fire, refusing to get dragged into the mud, elevating the conversation instead of degrading it. In churches and mosques, imams and pastors repeated his words to their congregations, reminding them that faith, like citizenship, is about what you give, not what others try to take away. The lesson extended beyond immigrants, beyond politics, beyond partisanship. Patel's response revealed something timeless, that every American, whether by birth or by choice, faces moments when they are told they don't belong. And in those moments, the choice is clear. You can crumble under the weight of someone else's smallness. Or you can rise, turning the insult into fuel, transforming exclusion into inclusion, hatred into hope. That's why the viral clip wasn't just about Patel. It was about all of us. When he said, "My story is America," millions heard their own reflection in those words. Veterans who felt forgotten. Workers whose labor rarely gets acknowledged. Women who were told they weren't welcome in boardrooms. Minorities who were told they weren't part of the fabric, even those whose families had been here for generations, remembering that their ancestors, too, were once told, "Go back." Patel's moment reminded America of a fundamental truth. Belonging is not granted by insult or withheld by prejudice. Belonging is earned through the courage to keep showing up, to keep contributing, to keep believing in the promise of a more perfect union. And so, the lesson lingers. We don't measure an American by where their story began, but by what they choose to write on this soil. The insult will be forgotten. The viral hashtags will fade. But the creed Patel spoke into existence will outlast them all. That dignity is stronger than hate. That values outshine insults. That America is not a closed club, but an unfinished story. One that every voice, every hand, every heart helps to write. And perhaps that is the truest resolution of all. This was never just about Patel, it was about us. About the kind of nation we choose to be. About whether we will shrink into smallness or rise into greatness. Patel answered that question with calm certainty. And America, hearing him, whispered back the same. My story is America. Our story is America. And no one, not even you, gets to decide who belongs. And so, we return to the moment that started it all. The insult that was meant to diminish. Kash Patel. A careless, cutting line meant to reduce him to an outsider. But instead of breaking him, it became his moment of triumph. What was intended as a dismissal became a declaration. What was hurled as an attack became the very spark that lit a fire across the nation. This isn't just a political story, it's a human one. It's about what happens when hate collides with dignity, when smallness is confronted by greatness. Patel didn't just defend himself, he reminded millions of us of who we are, and what America can still be. And here's the truth, this isn't just about Kash Patel, or Karoline Leavitt, or even that debate stage. This is about us, about the values we choose to elevate, the kind of nation we choose to build, and the kind of voices we choose to amplify. So here's my challenge to you. If you believe that dignity is stronger than hate, if you believe that America's story is not about exclusion but contribution, then share this story, spread it. Keep the conversation alive. Because the moment we stop talking about it, the moment we stop standing up for it, that's when insults start winning. And if you want to keep seeing stories like this, moments where character triumphs over chaos, where truth rises above noise, hit that subscribe button.
Leave a comment.
Add your voice to the movement. Because at the end of the day, America's story is not finished. It's still being written, word by word, choice by choice, voice by voice. And the final line is this: because America's story is still being written by all of us.